The screech of protesting iron is a hell of a way to start a Tuesday. I was on my second cup of black coffee when I heard it, the sickening _thud crunch _ of a luxury bumper meeting my hand-forged perimeter gate. I didn't even have to look out the window to know who it was. Beatrice, B. Sterling didn't do requests. She did demands. I watched through the kitchen window as her midnight blue Range Rover shoved my gate aside like it was a beaded curtain. She didn't slow down. She didn't check for damage. She just glided across my north pasture, her designer sunglasses reflecting the morning sun like a pair of insect eyes. To be, my 60 acres weren't a sanctuary, they were a 3-minute shortcut to the country club. The first time it happened, I figured she'd lost her brakes. The second time, I thought she was drunk. By the third time, I realized the truth, she was marking her territory. What Beatrice didn't realize was that I hadn't spent 40 years as a structural welder and site foreman just to let a suburban warlord flatten my hard work. I knew how to build things that stayed built. And I was currently designing a little architectural surprise that would ensure she never treated my land like a public highway again. When I bought Blackwood Ridge, I was looking for the 3 S's: silence, solitude, and space. After decades of breathing in diesel fumes and dealing with city inspectors who couldn't tell a load-bearing wall from a fence post, I just wanted to be left alone. My ranch sat right on the throat of the Glade, a high-end development governed by an HOA so strict they probably had a policy on the permissible decibel level of a sneeze. My deed, however, was old world, meaning I wasn't part of their collective. I didn't pay their dues, and I sure as hell didn't follow their uniform exterior aesthetic codes. The border was my gate. It was a heavy beast of reclaimed oak and reinforced steel hinges that I'd set 4 feet deep in concrete. It was my statement to the world, everything on this side belongs to me, I met the Queen of the Glades exactly 3 weeks after moving in. Beatrice pulled up in that gleaming Rover, her hair a silver blonde helmet that looked like it could deflect small arms fire. She rolled the window down just enough to let a puff of climate-controlled air escape. "Lovely rustic charm you have here," she said. Her smile was as sharp and cold as a razor blade. "Thanks," I replied, leaning on my shovel. "I plan to keep it that way." Without a word of warning, she tapped the gas. The Rover's grill guard caught the edge of my gate, forcing it open with a violent metallic groan. She sped off toward the development, leaving a cloud of dust and the smell of expensive perfume in her wake. I spent that evening with a sledgehammer and a level, resetting the latch. I told myself it was a one-off, an act of extreme entitlement that would fade. I was wrong. A week later, I heard the familiar roar of a V8 engine. I made it to the porch just in time to see the Rover barrel through again. She didn't even tap the brakes this time, she used the momentum of the vehicle to swing the gate wide. "Hey!" I bellowed, stepping off the porch. "This is private property. Use the main road." She didn't stop, but she did roll down the window to shout back over her shoulder, "Prescriptive easement, Mr. Vance. It's a community thoroughfare now. Read the room." "Easement?" I muttered to the empty air. My blood was past the boiling point, it was evaporating. I knew my deed. I'd studied the plat maps at the county office for 3 hours before signing the papers. There was no easement. No right-of-way. No community spirit clause. There was only my land and her ego. The next day, I headed down to Miller's Hardware to pick up some heavy-duty lag bolts. I ran into a couple of the local old-timers, Silas and Kuda, who were nursing sodas near the wood stove. "You look like you've been sucking on lemons, Elias," Silas chuckled, spitting into a brass tin. "I've got a neighbor who thinks my driveway is the Autobahn," I said. "A woman named Beatrice Sterling." The room went quiet for a heartbeat. Kuda shook his head. "The Dragon Lady? Good luck, son. She's been the HOA president at the Glade since the first brick was laid. She thinks she owns everything the light touches. She's been trying to get a road cut through your property for years, Silas added. The guy who owned it before you was old and tired. He let her bully him into using it. Now that you've closed the gate, she's just going to keep kicking it until it breaks. She told me it was a community easement, I said. Kuda laughed a dry, raspy sound. Beatrice Sterling doesn't follow the law, Elias. She invents it. If you fight her, she'll bury you in litigation and fines from the county. Best to just leave the gate open and save yourself the repair bills. I didn't like that advice. Giving up my land because a bully wanted to save 10 minutes on her commute? Not in this lifetime. The third time was the breaking point. I was out by the barn, greasing the tractor, when the rover appeared at the top of the rise. She saw me standing there, a grease-stained rag in my hand, and she actually smirked. She stopped the car right in front of the gate, idling the engine. "You're making this very difficult for yourself," she called out. "If you'd just install an automatic opener and give us the code, we wouldn't have these frictions." "There is no us, Beatrice," I said, walking toward the fence. "There's me, and there's a trespasser. Turn the car around." "Don't be provincial," she snapped, her eyes hardening. "The Glades is the premier community in this county. We provide the tax base that keeps your little dirt patch relevant. A bit of community spirit would go a long way. Otherwise, the HOA board might have to look into the nuisance your livestock creates. My cattle aren't a nuisance. They're on my side of the fence. For now," she said. Then, she floored it. The gate didn't just swing this time, a hinge snapped. The sound of wood splintering echoed through the valley. She drove through the wreckage like she was leading a parade. But it wasn't just her anymore. An hour later, a white Lexus and a BMW followed her lead, the drivers waving at me with casual arrogance as they followed the path B had cleared. They looked at me like I was the help. That evening, I found a formal-looking envelope tucked into the slats of my mailbox. It had the Silver Oaks HOA gold foil seal on the back. The letterhead read, "The Glades Architectural Review Committee. Dear resident, you are hereby notified of multiple Class A violations regarding visual nuisance and unapproved perimeter structures. Your entrance gate does not conform to the established aesthetic of the community. Remove the structure within 48 hours or face daily compounding fines of $250. Underscore. I didn't just laugh, I roared. I wasn't in their HOA. I had my own well, my own septic, and my own tax bill that didn't include a dime for their manicured golf courses. But there it was, black ink on expensive paper, ordering me to tear down the very barrier they kept smashing through. I took a trip down to the county recorder's office just to be 100% sure. The clerk, a woman named Martha who had been there since the invention of dirt, pulled the plat maps. "Nope," she said, tapping a weathered finger on my lot. "You're an island, Elias. Your deed is older than their development by 40 years. No easements, no shared access. That gate is yours to paint hot pink if you felt like it." I went home feeling vindicated, but the feeling didn't last. In 30 years of construction, I'd learned that a structure is only as strong as the man standing behind it. Beatrice Sterling wasn't just a bad neighbor, she was an expansionist. And she was starting to treat my land like an annexed territory. By the end of the month, the shortcut had become a habit. Beatrice wasn't just using it, she was flaunting it. The morning dust clouds from her rover were followed by evening raids, her headlights cutting through my bedroom curtains at 11 p.m. like searchlights in a prison yard. That Sunday, I decided to provide a physical rebuttal. I backed my 1998 Chevy Silverado, a rusted tank of a truck, right up against the inside of the gate. I dropped the tailgate, cracked a thermos of coffee, and waited. It took 20 minutes. The blue rover crested the hill, engine humming with that expensive, quiet power. She didn't slow down until she was 10 feet from my bumper. Beatrice leaned out the window, her silver bob perfectly in place despite the heat. "Mr. Vance, you're obstructing the flow of traffic," she called out, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Traffic implies a road, Beatrice," I said, taking a slow sip of coffee. "This is a driveway. My driveway. And it's closed today." "You're being incredibly provincial," she snapped, the mask slipping. "This route is a vital artery for the community. You can't own land that blocks access to the common good. It's a matter of public policy." "Public policy doesn't trump a deed of trust," I replied. "I checked with the county. There's no easement. You're trespassing, and you're damaging my property." Her eyes went cold, not the cold of ice, but the cold of a deep-sea predator. "We'll see what the board has to say about that. Move the truck, Elias. Don't make this expensive for yourself." "Have a nice drive around the long way," I said, and closed my eyes to enjoy the sun. She sat there for a full minute, her engine growling in frustration, before slamming the Rover into reverse and shrieking back toward the main road in a spray of gravel. For an hour, I felt like a king. The victory lasted exactly until Monday morning. I came back from a supply run in town to find my gate, the one I'd spent 12 hours reinforcing, lying flat in the dirt. The heavy oak timbers were snapped like toothpicks. The steel hinges were twisted into metal ribbons. The tire tracks weren't just from a Rover, they were wide, heavy, and numerous. As I stood there, a maroon minivan with a Silver Oaks HOA, proud member, sticker rolled right over the fallen gate. The driver, a guy in a polo shirt, didn't even look at me. He just checked his watch and kept going. Behind him came a silver sedan. This wasn't just Beatrice anymore. She'd deputized the neighborhood. My ranch had been officially rebranded as a public thoroughfare. I went to the HOA office that afternoon. It was a sterile, glass and brick building that smelled like industrial lavender and ego. Beatrice was behind a mahogany desk, flanked by binders of community standards. "We need to talk," I said, slamming the broken hinge I'd brought with me onto her desk. She didn't flinch. She just slid a manila folder toward me. "Indeed we do. You're currently $3,750 in arrears, Mr. Vance." "Arrears for what?" "I don't belong to your club. Unapproved structures, failure to maintain a clear roadway, and 3 counts of harassment of board members," she said, checking off items with a gold pen. "The board has voted to categorize your driveway as a prescriptive utility corridor. It's for the welfare of the community. You can't just vote away someone else's property lines." I snapped. Beatrice leaned forward, her voice a low, dangerous purr. "In this county, Elias, community welfare is whatever the people with the most lawyers say it is. You're a retired laborer living on a fixed income. We are a collection of 300 homeowners with a combined net worth that could buy your ranch 10 times over. Don't fight a war you can't afford." "This isn't about money," I said. "It's about the law." "The law is flexible," she whispered. "My patience is not. The gate stays down, or we will lien your property until you're forced to sell it at auction." I spent the next 3 days in my shop. I didn't rebuild the gate. I didn't call the police. I just worked. I was a welder by trade, and I knew that while wood breaks and paper burns, steel and physics have a way of settling every argument. At midnight on Thursday, I was jolted awake. It wasn't the sound of a gate opening. It was the sound of a 3-ton SUV hitting something that didn't want to move. A sound of crunching fiberglass and the explosive pop of airbags. I grabbed my flashlight and walked out onto the porch. The shortcut was about to become very, very permanent. The tail lights of Beatrice's Rover winked out into the darkness, leaving me standing in a silence that felt heavier than the night itself. This time, she hadn't even slowed down to offer a smug wave. It was pure, unadulterated defiance, the kind of arrogance that only comes when someone believes they are truly untouchable. I looked down at the wreckage. My gate, the one I'd built with pride and 40 years of craftsmanship, was reduced to kindling for the fourth time. The cedar planks were splintered like matchsticks, and the reinforced hinges I'd welded were twisted into agonizing shapes. My ranch, my sanctuary, felt like an occupied territory. The next morning, I went into town to pick up more heavy-duty hardware. The atmosphere at the local feed store had shifted. As I walked past the counter, I heard the hushed tones of neighbors. "Heard Beatrice took his gate down again last night," one man muttered, not looking up from his coffee. "Won't end well for him," another replied. "Nobody beats the Dragon Lady. She's got the sheriff on speed dial and the county board in her back pocket. Best he just lets her have her way before she sues him into the poorhouse." It was a cold realization. I couldn't rely on the good old boy system or the local bureaucracy. Beatrice Sterling didn't just run the HOA, she ran the narrative of the whole valley. She believed that because she had the most money and the loudest voice, the law was merely a suggestion. But I wasn't built to roll over. My years in construction had taught me a fundamental truth: if a structure keeps failing, you don't keep patching it. You redesign it. When I got home, a fresh envelope was wedged into my mailbox. It wasn't just a letter this time, it was a final notice of non-compliance. Violation, obstruction of a community thoroughfare. Action required, immediate and permanent removal of all gate structures at the northern boundary. Penalty, $250 daily fine, plus restitution costs for the alleged damage my gate was causing to their vehicles. The audacity of it made my vision blur. They were charging me for the repairs on the cars that were trespassing on my land and hitting my gate. I was still fuming when I heard the click-clack of heels on my porch. I opened the door to find Beatrice herself. She was holding a clipboard, looking as polished as a showroom floor. "You've had your warnings, Elias," she said, her voice sharp as a winter wind. "Remove the obstruction or the HOA will initiate a forced lien on this property. We've already filed the prescriptive easement paperwork with the county." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over my chest. "This isn't your land, Beatrice. This isn't your road. You're playing a very dangerous game with other people's property." "I am the president of the Glades," she hissed, her face flushing a blotchy red. "And the welfare of my 300 residents outweighs the stubbornness of one man living in a shack." "It's a ranch, not a shack," I said evenly. "And I'm not denying access to neighbors. I'm denying a shortcut to a trespasser. There's a paved county road 3 miles east. Use it." She jabbed her gold pen toward my chest. "You're a selfish, small-minded man. You'll regret this." The following week, the harassment turned into a siege. Men with clipboards, members of the HOA Compliance Committee, started appearing at my fence line like vultures. They didn't even ask for permission. They just marched onto the edges of my property, snapping photos of my barn, my hayloft, and my livestock. I caught one of them, a wiry man with a permanent sneer named Henderson, peering into my tool shed. "What do you think you're doing?" I demanded. "Documenting violations of community aesthetics," he said, not even looking at me as he scribbled on his clipboard. "This barn hasn't been painted in the approved Glade slate color. It's an eyesore. I don't live in the Glades." I shouted. He just smirked. "Beatrice says the boundary is fluid. Expect the fines by Friday." The breaking point didn't happen in the daylight. It happened at 11:45 p.m. on a Thursday. I was jolted awake not by one crash, but by a series of them. I grabbed my flashlight and a heavy iron pry bar and ran to the drive. My heart sank. This wasn't just Beatrice. It was a convoy. 3 cars, the blue Rover, a silver Lexus, and a maroon minivan, had plowed through the temporary gate I'd put up. They were circling through my pasture, their headlights bouncing wildly across the grass, hooting and hollering like they were at a tailgate party. They were making a statement, "Your land is our playground, I went to the sheriff's office the next morning. Deputy Holloway wouldn't even look me in the eye. Without high-def video of the drivers' faces, Elias, I can't do much. And honestly, Beatrice is claiming you're creating a public safety hazard by blocking that road. If an ambulance needed that shortcut and hit your gate, you'd be looking at a manslaughter charge. An ambulance? They're using it to get to the golf course. He just shrugged. It's your word against the HOA board. Maybe just, leave it open. I drove home in a silence so cold it felt like ice in my veins. If the law wouldn't protect my borders, I would. That evening, Beatrice pulled up one last time while I was repairing the gate. She looked out her window, a look of bored triumph on her face. Giving up yet, Elias? You're wasting your time with those wooden posts. We'll just break them again tomorrow. I didn't look up from my work. I just kept tightening a bolt. You might be right, Beatrice. Wood is a fragile thing. Maybe it's time I tried something a bit more permanent. Smart man, she purred. I expect it to stay open from now on. She drove off, convinced she'd won. But that night, I didn't sit on the porch with a coffee. I sat at my kitchen table with a blueprint and a calculator. Wood wasn't the answer. Hinges weren't the answer. If Beatrice wanted to use horsepower to bully her way through my life, I was going to give her exactly what she wanted, an immovable object. I spent the next 3 days in my shop with the welder's mask down. I wasn't building a gate anymore. I was building a trap. A structure reinforced with 4-inch industrial steel piping, filled with high PSI concrete, and anchored into a trench that went 6 feet underground. To the naked eye, it would look like a simple, rustic wooden gate. I'd even skin it with cedar planks to make it look conforming. But inside? Inside, it was a tank trap. I chuckled, a low, dangerous sound that echoed in the empty shop. Beatrice thought she was playing a game of fines and influence. She was about to learn that physics doesn't care about your net worth. The next move was mine. When Beatrice came barreling through again, she was going to discover the physical cost of underestimating a man who had spent 40 years making sure things stayed exactly where he put them. I woke up before dawn with a clarity I hadn't felt since I retired. I wasn't just a rancher, I was a builder. I'd spent 3 decades on high-rise job sites, raising structures from nothing, pouring foundations designed to outlast the men who paid for them. If I could build a skyscraper to withstand a gale-force wind, I could damn sure build a gate to withstand a mid-sized luxury SUV. But this wouldn't just be a gate. This was an architectural ambush. I started with the bones. I bypassed the flimsy, pressure-treated lumber at the local yard and went straight to the back of my shop. I had a stash of industrial-grade I-beams I'd salvaged from a bridge demolition years ago. They were rusted and heavy, but the steel was as honest as a heartbeat. Next came the anchors. Instead of digging a standard post hole, I rented a power auger and drilled 6 feet down. I dropped in steel pipes the size of telephone poles and encased them in a rebar cage before pouring high PSI concrete. Each post was now essentially a rooted mountain. I welded crossbraces and angled supports at the impact zone, turning the frame into something that would make a Panzer tank nervous. Then, I applied the skin. I layered the front and back with thick, rough-cut cedar planks. From 30 feet away, it looked like the same humble, rustic gate Beatrice had been smashing for weeks. But behind that aesthetic conformance lay a wall of unyielding steel. I didn't stop at the gate. I dug shallow, camouflaged trenches just past the entrance and installed tire spoilers, hardened steel spikes set into concrete troughs, hidden beneath a thin layer of loose gravel. If she managed to push the gate, the spikes would ensure she didn't get another 10 feet. I worked through the night by the amber glow of a lantern, the smell of ozone and burnt metal filling the air. My dogs watched from the porch, their heads tilted as if they understood their master was preparing for a siege. On the 3rd day of the upgrade, I saw the midnight blue Rover idling just past my property line. Beatrice was sitting behind the wheel, her phone held up to the window, likely recording me for her next board meeting. I didn't stop. I just kept the grinder screaming against the steel, sending a shower of sparks into the dirt. Finally, she rolled down the window. "You're wasting your breath and your money, Elias," she shouted over the noise. "You can't stop progress. The board is filing an injunction this afternoon." I didn't look up. I just adjusted my welding mask. "I'm not trying to stop progress, Beatrice. I'm just reinforcing the boundary." Her laugh was sharp, like breaking glass. "We'll see how reinforced it is when the county bulldozers arrive. Enjoy your little hobby while it lasts." She spat gravel as she sped away. That evening, my neighbor Silas stopped by. He was a man who had spent 60 years mending fences and knew the local politics better than anyone. He leaned against the tailgate of my Silverado, watching me torque down the final bolts. "You're playing with fire, Elias," he said, though there was a twinkle in his eye. "She's got the sheriff on her speed dial. She'll scream 'booby trap' the second she hits this." "It's not a trap, Silas," I replied, wiping the grease from my hands. "It's a security-enhanced perimeter structure. I'm just protecting my livestock from unauthorized vehicles." Silas studied the gate, then the hidden spikes, and finally let out a dry chuckle. "Well, I always did like a man who stands his ground. Need a hand with the last of that rebar?" Together, we finished the reinforcements. When we stepped back, the gate looked perfectly ordinary and unsightly structure that Beatrice would find irresistible. By Saturday afternoon, the trap was set. The gate swung with a heavy, satisfying thud, locking into steel brackets that were part of the concrete foundation itself. The gravel looked undisturbed. The world was quiet. I sat on my porch with a cold glass of tea, my boots up on the railing. I didn't have to wait long. Around 2 p.m., the low, throaty rumble of the rover echoed through the valley. It wasn't alone. Behind Beatrice came a caravan of HOA entitlement, the treasurer's maroon minivan and a silver sedan belonging to the committee secretary. It was a community outing designed to show me who really owned the ridge. Beatrice didn't slow down. In fact, as she neared the gate, she actually accelerated. She wanted the impact to be spectacular. She wanted to see the cedar splinter and fly. She wanted to see me standing on the porch, defeated, as she led her people through my shortcut. I didn't move. I just took a slow sip of my tea. She was 50 feet away, 30, 20. I could see her smug grin through the windshield, the way she gripped the steering wheel like a conqueror. She revved the engine, the rover's nose dipping as it gathered momentum for the final blow. The kinetic energy of 3 tons of luxury engineering meets the unyielding reality of industrial steel in a way that is profoundly satisfying to the ears. I held my breath as the rover closed the final 20 feet. Beatrice didn't flinch, she leaned into the accelerator, her face a mask of predatory triumph. Then, the world changed for her. The sound wasn't the splintering which she expected. It was a rhythmic, bone-deep crack thud, the sound of an anvil being struck by a sledgehammer. The gate didn't just hold, it didn't even shiver. The rover's front end transformed instantly from a status symbol into a crumpled accordion of fiberglass and aluminum. Airbags detonated like white lightning inside the cabin, filling the interior with a fog of chemical dust. But the physics lesson wasn't over. As the rover's momentum tried to carry it forward, the rear tires rolled directly over my camouflaged, spoiler, trench. Pop 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 hiss. The hardened steel teeth bit through the high-performance rubber like a hot knife through butter. Within seconds, the pride of the Silver Oaks HOA was sagging forward on 4 shredded rims, hissing steam and fluids onto my gravel like a dying dragon. Behind her, the convoy was a mess of panicked braking. The maroon minivan swerved into the drainage ditch to avoid a rear-end collision, while the silver sedan skidded sideways, its horn blaring a long, lonely note of defeat. I didn't move from my porch chair. I just tipped my hat. Beatrice fought her way out of the driver's side door, stumbling into the afternoon sun. Her silver bob was disheveled, her face dusted white from the airbag deployment, and her eyes were wide with a manic, vibrating fury. You monster," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "What have you done to my car? This is a trap. You've committed a felony." I stood up slowly, the floorboards of the porch creaking under my boots. "What I've done, Beatrice, is build a gate that actually works. You were the one who decided to use it as a battering ram." I walked down the steps and stopped 10 feet from the wreckage. Up close, the damage was beautiful. The I-beam core of my gate hadn't even lost its paint, but the Rover's grille was shoved halfway into the engine block. "This is an illegal obstruction," she screamed, her voice cracking. "I have a right to this road. You've put lives at risk." "No," I said, my voice dropping into a low, steady register. "You put your own life at risk when you ignored the 'no trespassing' signs, the verbal warnings, and the basic laws of property ownership. You chose to ram a closed gate. That's not a community thoroughfare issue, that's a driving while entitled issue." The noise had drawn a crowd. Neighbors from the main road had pulled over, and I could see the glint of dozens of smartphone cameras catching every second of Beatrice's meltdown. "Looks like the Queen found her immovable object," someone yelled from the fence line. A ripple of laughter followed, sharp and mocking. The HOA treasurer crawled out of the minivan in the ditch, clutching his clipboard like a holy relic, but he looked at the wreckage of the Rover and turned a sickly shade of gray. The secretary in the sedan didn't even get out, he just slumped over the steering wheel, defeated by the sheer optics of the disaster. When Sheriff Holloway finally arrived, he didn't even put on his sirens. He just stepped out of his cruiser, adjusted his belt, and stared at the Rover for a long, silent minute. "He sabotaged the road, Sheriff," Beatrice wailed, running toward him. "He set a lethal trap. I want him arrested. I want this ranch seized." Holloway looked at her, then at me, then at the heavy steel posts anchored in concrete. "Elias, that looks like a pretty sturdy gate." "I wanted it to match community standards for durability, Sheriff," I said. "And I wanted to make sure I had a clear record of any further accidents." I pointed to the 2 discrete security cameras I'd mounted on the posts. Beatrice's face went from blotchy red to a ghostly, translucent white. You were recording?" "High definition, with audio," I replied. "It'll show you accelerating into a closed gate on private property. It'll also show your friends behind you attempting to do the same." The sheriff sighed and looked at Beatrice. "Ma'am, the only person who sabotaged your car was the person behind the wheel. You've been warned 3 times this month. If these tapes show what I think they show, I'm not arresting Elias. I'm citing you for reckless driving and criminal trespass." The tow trucks arrived an hour later to drag the convoy of shame back to the development. For a few hours, the ranch was quiet. I felt a peace I hadn't known in months. But I knew Beatrice Sterling. To a woman like her, humiliation isn't a stop sign, it's a challenge. The very next morning, a process server in a cheap suit pulled up to my, undamaged, gate. He didn't try to drive through. He walked up and handed me a thick, heavy envelope. Inside was a notice of comprehensive litigation. The HOA wasn't just suing me, they were throwing the entire legal library at me. Reckless endangerment. Willful destruction of property. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. A petition for permanent easement by necessity. They wanted me to pay for the Rover, the minivan's tow, Beatrice's trauma, and, this was the kicker, they wanted the court to grant them ownership of the driveway to ensure the safety of the community. I didn't lose my cool. I just finished my coffee and drove into town to see Martha Thorne. Martha was a property attorney who looked like a kindly grandmother but had the legal instincts of a great white shark. She leafed through the HOA's filing, a small, dangerous smile spreading across her lips. "They sent you this?" she asked, tapping the papers. "Fresh off the press," I said. "Elias," she chuckled, "this isn't a lawsuit. This is a suicide note written in legalese. They're claiming easement by necessity on a property that has 3 other points of paved access. They're suing for endangerment when their own president was filmed intentionally ramming a stationary object. She leaned back, her eyes twinkling. I've been waiting for someone to finally give Beatrice Sterling enough rope to hang the entire HOA board. Would you like me to play defense, or should we go on the offensive? They don't have jurisdiction over your dirt and they know it, Martha said, tapping the stack of HOA filings with a manicured nail. But they're banking on you folding under the sheer weight of the paperwork. Most people would. They'd see the word litigation and start tearing down their own fences just to make the scary letters stop. Well, I said, leaning back in the leather chair, folding isn't in my vocabulary. I've spent 30 years working with materials that don't bend. I'm not about to start now. Martha's grin was predatory. Good. Because in the legal world, Beatrice Sterling just committed the cardinal sin. She handed me the gun, the bullets, and a map to her own position. Within the week, Martha didn't just file a defense, she launched a legal blitzkrieg. We sued the HOA for trespassing, malicious destruction of private property, harassment, and civil fraud. The fraud part was Martha's stroke of genius. Since they knew I wasn't in the HOA but sent me fines anyway, she argued they were attempting to use their corporate status to extort money from a private citizen. When Beatrice realized I wasn't rolling over, she went into full PR mode. 2 days later, I came home to find a protest at my gate. Beatrice had rallied 4 or 5 of her most loyal board members. They were standing on the public shoulder of the road, brandishing clipboards and shouting at my house like they were storming the Bastille. "This man is a menace," one woman shrieked as I pulled up. "He set a lethal trap. Think of the children." Beatrice was in the center, her silver hair shimmering in the sun, waving a set of architectural blueprints. "We cannot allow one stubborn hermit to endanger the safety of this community. This gate is a violation of human decency." A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, but the vibe was different this time. They weren't nodding in agreement, they were whispering. I stepped out of my truck, crossed my arms, and let them finish their performance. "You all want the truth?" I called out, my voice carrying over their shouting. "Go home and check your community Facebook page. I just uploaded the raw footage from my security cams." The shouting died down instantly. Everyone reached for their phones. I'd sent the clip to a local community group, not the one Beatrice moderated, but the uncensored one. "Watch it," I said. "Watch her accelerate into a closed gate. Watch her friends follow her like sheep. Then tell me who's endangering the community." The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd heard in years. Beatrice's face went a shade of purple I didn't know the human body could produce. The crowd didn't cheer for her. They just started walking away, murmuring about reckless driving and wasted dues. The cracks in her kingdom were becoming canyons. The court hearing was a masterclass in humiliation. Beatrice arrived in a power-red suit, her board members trailing behind her like nervous ducklings. She strutted into the courtroom as if she were the judge, the jury, and the executioner. When the case was called, her lawyer launched into a dramatic, shaking voice monologue about booby traps, reclusive aggression, and the sacred right of community access. Then Martha stood up. She was calm, precise, and absolutely deadly. "Your Honor," Martha began, "the evidence will show that my client's property is a sovereign deeded lot, completely outside the Silver Oaks jurisdiction. These fines were a work of fiction. But more importantly, let's look at the endangerment the plaintiff mentions." Martha clicked a remote. The courtroom screens flickered to life. The video played in high def. You could hear the roar of the rover's engine. You could see Beatrice's face, not scared, not confused, but smirking right before the impact. The sound of the SUV hitting the steel core sounded like a bomb going off. Then came the pop-pop-pop of the tires in the trench. The judge, a no-nonsense man named Miller, leaned forward, his eyebrows nearly disappearing into his hairline. "Is that the plaintiff behind the wheel?" the judge asked, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "It is, Your Honor," Martha replied. Accelerating into a stationary, closed gate on private property. Beatrice couldn't help herself. She jumped up, pointing a finger at the screen. "I am the president of the HOA. He can't defy me. He can't defy the collective will of the neighborhood." Bang! The judge's gavel hit the bench with a crack that made everyone jump. "Sit down, Ms. Sterling," the judge growled. "This is a court of law, not your personal boardroom. You will remain silent until you are asked to speak." The ruling wasn't just a win, it was an execution. The judge dismissed every single one of the HOA's claims with prejudice. He ordered the HOA to pay $15,000 in damages for property destruction and another $10,000 for Martha's legal fees. But the real sting came for Beatrice personally. He cited her for criminal trespass and reckless endangerment, ordering her to perform 100 hours of community service, specifically, cleaning up the county roads she loved so much. And then came the internet. Because the footage was entered into the public record, it was leaked within 48 hours. By the end of the week, Beatrice Sterling was the star of a viral meme. People dubbed it the Gate of Justice. One version of the video was edited with the "You shall not pass" audio from _Lord of the Rings _. Another had a slow-motion zoom on her face at the moment of impact with the caption, "When entitlement meets physics." The fallout in Pine Hollow was total. Realizing their dues had been spent on a losing personal vendetta, the residents revolted. The board members resigned one by one, leaving Beatrice standing alone in a house she could no longer afford to defend. Peace finally returned to Blackwood Ridge. No more SUVs. No more clipboards. Just the sound of the wind and the satisfaction of a gate that didn't move. But as I sat on my porch 3 weeks later, sipping a coffee, a certified letter arrived. It wasn't a legal summons. It was a personal note from Beatrice. The tone had shifted from dictator to diplomat. She talked about healing divisions and moving forward for the sake of the neighborhood. She offered a generous settlement. If I removed the menacing gate and allowed a limited community passage, she would drop any future grievances and personally ensure my privacy. I looked at the letter, then at the gate, my beautiful, steel-cored, indestructible gate. I took a slow sip of coffee and picked up my pen. I didn't need a lawyer to draft my response. The letter sat on my kitchen table, smelling faintly of expensive stationery and desperation. Beatrice was talking about healing divisions and community restoration. It was a masterpiece of manipulative prose, an attempt to turn her crushing legal defeat into a magnanimous gesture of peace. I laughed until my ribs ached. She wasn't trying to heal anything, she was trying to claw back the one thing she'd lost, control. I didn't call Martha. I didn't need a lawyer for this. I grabbed a piece of plain notebook paper and wrote 2 sentences in black ink. There is no community easement, Beatrice. There is only my land, my road, and your imagination. Stop by the county clerk's office if you need a refresher on how to read a map. See, here's the twist that I've been holding onto like a loaded gun. While Beatrice was busy filing bogus fines and screaming about prescriptive rights, I'd done more than just reinforce a gate. I'd spent 3 days in the dusty basement of the county archives, tracing the chain of title for Blackwood Ridge back to the late 1800s. I discovered that the shortcut she loved so much wasn't a public right-of-way that had been grandfathered in. Decades ago, the original rancher had built that path specifically to move cattle between pastures. It had never been dedicated to the county. It had never been a public thoroughfare. The road itself was part of my deed. Beatrice and her board hadn't just been trespassing on my land, they had been illegally utilizing a private driveway as a neighborhood drag strip. Every cent she had spent on legal fees, every ounce of breath she'd wasted claiming community benefit, was built on a lie. The response was immediate. 20 minutes after the courier delivered my note, the Blue Rover, now a patched-together wreck with mismatched body panels, shrieked to a halt outside my gate. Beatrice stormed toward the fence, waving my note like a declaration of war. "This is fraud," she screamed, her voice echoing off the barn. "You can't own a road. It's a vital artery for the Glades. I'll have the state legislature look into this." I walked down the porch steps, hands in my pockets, and stopped at the steel-reinforced line in the sand. "Check the 1954 survey, Beatrice," I said, my voice calm and low. Book 42, page 118. "The road is private. It's titled to the owner of Blackwood Ridge. That's me. You've been trespassing for years, and I've been patient for exactly as long as I'm going to be." Her face went through a fascinating series of colors, from frantic red to a sickly, pale gray. She sputtered, her mouth moving but no sound coming out. That's impossible. The HOA charter says." "The HOA charter stops where my property line starts," I interrupted. "Consider yourself formally trespassed. If that bumper touches this steel again, you won't be talking to a judge. You'll be talking to a tow truck driver from the back of a squad car." The usual crowd of neighbors had gathered, phones held high. For the first time, Beatrice didn't look like a queen. She looked like a tired, broken bully whose bluff had finally been called. She let out a frustrated, guttural cry, stomped her designer heel into the gravel, and retreated to her ruined car. From that day on, that shortcut stayed closed. The Silver Oaks HOA didn't survive the scandal. When the residents found out Beatrice had led them into a legal woodchipper over a road she didn't even have a right to use, the revolution was swift. The board was dissolved, the compliance officers were fired, and Beatrice Sterling eventually put her house on the market and moved 3 towns over. My ranch finally became the sanctuary I'd paid for. The mornings were silent. The air was clear. And my gate? It stood as a silent, indestructible monument to the truth. I didn't win because I was meaner than Beatrice. I won because I was steadfast. I hadn't stooped to her level of lies or intimidation. I'd simply built something that couldn't be broken and stood my ground until the dust settled. This story isn't really about a gate or a luxury SUV. It's about boundaries. In your life, your gate might not be made of I-beams and concrete. It might be your time, your emotional energy, or your peace of mind. There will always be people like Beatrice, folks who think your no is just a suggestion and that their convenience is worth more than your dignity. They will test you. They will push against your lines and wait for you to splinter. But you have a choice: you can patch the wood, or you can reinforce the steel. Respect isn't something you beg for, it's something you command by refusing to move when you're in the right. Build your boundaries strong. Anchor them deep. And never apologize for protecting what's yours. A final thought for you. What is the gate in your life that you've been letting people walk through lately? Is it your weekends? Your self-respect? Your creative energy?